In this video, I'm trying to elaborate on how this follow chain work, how to make sense of it. So we need to start from the very beginning. Here, we focus on the buyers who do not have a house, who wanted to buy a house. And we need to make sure the buy and sell flow is intact. In this way, the buyer can actually buy the house and move into the house. So we need to check whether the buy and sell flow is smooth, is intact or not. So we go into this function. Remember, this first link is the buyer himself or herself, okay? And we are also under the buyer's context. So the first sentence is this. Under the buyer's context, the buyer offers a house a price to buy it. So this is the house the buyer is interested in. And if the house is actually a house, then this condition will not work. But if the buyer looks at the house and the house is not a real house, then we say, okay, the buyer looking for something which is not a house, then certainly will not buy a house. Therefore, the buy and sell workflow is not intact. So we will return false. Okay, that is an acceptable condition, which is just saying, okay, that's no deal. But what if it is a house? If it is a house, we will see whether this house has an owner. If there is an owner, we will make it a seller. So if the seller is not an owner, so which means the house have no seller, the house has no owner. If the house has no owner and the house is also on the market to be sold, then as long as there is a buyer, well, the house can be sold. So that's easy. So if the house owner is not a real owner, okay, in this way, the buyer can easily buy the house as long as the price is right. So this is easy. This way, the buy and sell flow is intact, so it can be solved. Okay, this answer is acceptable. But what if the seller is an owner? And in this way, we come to the third condition, and we will check the seller and the buyer, are they the same people? If they are the same people, then the buy and sell flow is intact. Why? Because the buyer and the seller are the same people. Then it's kind of, it's already done. The deal is already done. But in reality, for the same house, it is same people, same person who want to sell it and buy it. It's kind of contradictory. So that wouldn't happen. So normally this condition will not be met. The buyer is one person, is one household, the seller is another household. For the same house, they cannot be the same household. So, okay, this will not happen most of the time. So then we will focus on the seller's context. And the first link is still our buyer. We will go into the seller's context and looking for and going to check whether the buyer's buying flow, sell and buyer chain is intact or not. So we will do the iteration. We will go back to the first sentence. The first sentence asks the sellers made offer, which means is seller interested in buying another house? If the seller is interested in buying a house and offer the price on a house, then this house should be a real house. And if it is a real house, then this condition will not go through, we will move on. But If this is not a house, this will go through and we will return false. So the seller is not buying a house, which means the seller got a house and are not interested in a new house, which means the seller will has to stay inside his own house. If the seller is staying inside his own house, the buyer cannot buy the house from the seller. Therefore, the sell and buy chain will not go through. It's not intact, so we return false. Makes sense. And if the seller is interested in another house, now we move on. And this another house has its own owner or not. Let's make it seller. If it's not a real owner, which means the house the buyer interested in does not have an owner. Therefore, this seller can easily buy this house. And if this seller easily buy another house, he will have to sell his own house. If he sells his own house, then the buyer can have that house. So it makes sense. It goes through easily. So this is true. It makes sense. But what if the seller is a real owner? Okay, the new seller of this house is a real owner. Then, if this owner of the house the old seller wants to buy is actually the buyer himself or herself, then that's good, because the old seller interested in a house and whose owner is this seller and also is this buyer. Then basically this buyer can switch the house to the seller and the seller can switch the house to the buyer and they can do the transaction. So the buyer and the sell workflow is intact. Okay, so this is the full picture of why this iteration can work, why a buyer through this function can check whether it can actually buy a house or not.